And I would like to welcome all our ISM members, especially those joining from other chapters, including Dallas, Florida, Eastern Virginia, Nevada, Denver, and New York. We will be running a special event on January 7th with a special guest, Jeff Butler, who is a workplace generational and technology speaker, who will be talking about refining leadership in a new decade. Please make sure to register for this special event. We will also be launching a new series, Voice of Supply Chain, where we will have a special guest host interview selected guests and a 45-minute program. Our premiere episode will be on January 13th, and our special guest will be Gentine Van Dyk, who is a consultant for the San Francisco 49ers. So this should be a really great conversation as she shares all of her stories. At this point, I would like now to turn the screen over to Anu Rao, who is our membership director.
Thank you, Kathy, and welcome everyone. As Kathy mentioned, am the Director of Membership at ISM New Jersey, and as always, very excited to be at the membership meeting. And a special welcome to everyone from all the other chapters too. So today we are starting off a networking session after the guest speaker where all of you can join in and we can say hello to each other, almost mimicking sitting across from the table and saying hi. So I hope your schedule permits for you to stay on with us. Kathy will be pasting the link to the networking session. So you can take a 5-minute break after Tom finishes his speech, and then you can rejoin using the link that Kathy has provided. So look forward to seeing you at the end for the networking session.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Anu. Thank you so much. Please make sure to use the Q&A or the chat function for any questions you may have for our speaker. And I will be putting in the meeting link for the networking session that will follow Tom's presentation in a few minutes. And now for a feature presentation. Tom Cook is the CEO and Managing Director for Blue Tiger International, premier international business consulting company on supply chain, trade compliance, purchasing, global trade, and logistics. Tom has been a past speaker for our chapter on topics such as global trade, the impact of tariffs, Ecoterms 2020, which he did for us earlier this year, and was a panelist during our COVID-19 resiliency series earlier this year. I would like to now turn the program over to our speaker, Tom Cook.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Anu, and welcome to all the people from all the various chapters. Um, I'm actually part of the New York chapter of ISM, but I do a lot of work for a lot of the different associations and organizations related to ISM all over the country. So the topic that we're going to speak about is managing personnel and business remotely, successfully dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic consequences. We have an agenda of topics that we're going to discuss. And the kind of nature of this whole thing, obviously, is that when the pandemic hit this country back in February and March, one of the reactions of a lot of companies, both by decision and also by default, was to move a lot of the people to work remotely. In a lot of states and a lot of cities and areas around the country, that was by government mandate, and in other cases, it was just by companies making that decision. And as we moved out of March and into April and May, this became a much more serious problem, and it impacted the entire United States. And always appreciate the fact that the whole world was impacted by the events of this pandemic. But the concept of personnel and business working remotely is not something that's brand new. I got involved with a number of companies back in the mid 1990s in working with them at putting people out of brick and mortar and into remote locations. And my own company, myself, with a little bit more than 50 people, we went remote back in 2013. So kind of this presentation is about things that we learned as our own company in managing people successfully and dealing with issues around people working in that remote environment. And also from a number of the resources that we've been able to develop, because we're attached to a number of training and learning organizations that actually have put out a significant amount of material on this that we've integrated into this presentation. So we are going to put this thing together for you, and you'll be able to ask all the questions that you want. I'd like to keep it as informal as I possibly can, and at least formal, if that's okay. So I have a whole list here of the things that we're going to talk about. That's for your future reference. And I wanted to especially thank Kathy and the ISM New Jersey organization, because I've done a number of presentations and spoken to them. You should be really proud and feel pretty good about the fact that you have Kathy working for you, because she's out there doing a lot of outreach and bringing in a lot of good people to speak on behalf and getting the organization put together. A lot of the ISM chapters are actually struggling now because of the pandemic, but ISM New Jersey is moving along pretty strong, particularly because of Kathy's leadership. And in my own organization, Lindsay Denny, who helped put the event together. So as it was explained, I run a consulting company, have been doing this since 1981. We work in the supply chain and general management areas, and we tend to focus on companies that generally have a huge or large international footprint. Keep in mind as we go through this conversation is that while we're actually in about the 9th month of this impact, these are unprecedented times. There's never been a time in modern history that the country has seen this kind of problem and the consequences and the impact of this problem. That's, again, not only here, but all over the world. So as we go through the presentation, my focus is going to be to kind of frame all the issues, outline the challenges that those issues have caused, view this from a person's and also a management perspective. And as I go through this, what I'm really trying to do is to get to recommendations and try to get to options and things that you need to think about relative to how best to manage this problem. But I frame the issues first because it really helps us in terms of trying to understand how I got to the recommendations and your options. So there are unintended consequences as a result of people working from home and this whole pandemic. And the first thing I put out front is that people's sensibilities are different in every household, in every business, in every community, in every state, in every country, in every location around the world. And that as we navigate this pandemic, we need to be sensitive ourselves to the fact that other people view the problem in a different way. Their kind of justification for what steps they take are comfortable to them that may not be comfortable to you. And we need to be less judgmental, actually, and really be more sensitive to how other people are handling this. Appreciate the fact that the impact is even greater with our children, school, and childcare. And understand that while many of us are working, that the unemployment rate, depending upon where you are, is between 14 and 20% here in the United States. In some countries around the world, it's as high as 30 and 35%. One of the impacts of the pandemic is also a significant amount of civil unrest and current political arena that we're facing, which I know most people's attitude is, you want to know something? I turned off the news. I'm not even watching it anymore because I'm so disgusted. And appreciate that the government intervention is a moving target. It seems that our Congress and our Senate just can't get together to give a new program for PPE. And their whole guidelines, both at the state level, the local level, and the federal level of the controls that they're putting in place, and the ununiformity of all those controls that are in place. I have obviously a lot of clients out in California. I also have 2 of my 5 children out in California. And there are certain places where they have it actually locked down where if you don't need to essentially leave your house, you're not allowed to leave your house. The impact on the entire world for all those of us that have a global footprint and are doing trade and importing and exporting, appreciate the fact that this impact is everywhere. and appreciate the fact that people being uncomfortable with the circumstances that we face all have different reactions and behavior to what's going on. We hear this thing about the COVID kind of fatigue that's out there that people have as a result of this now going into its ninth and 10th month. So one of the things that I've realized has changed a lot, and in my own company as well, is the concept of personal versus business. We've always been very clear to try to define very specific lines between personal and business. But when you have somebody working from home, and you have now a whole group of people working from home, and you also have the circumstances that they have a home office, okay? They're traveling to and from that house, possibly to do certain things relative to work, okay? Um, they have children at home. They have personal responsibilities at home that interfere with certain things. That the line is not as defined, and it's much more gray today than it's ever been. And we have on the political front, making sure that our president who leaves office does it gently. Um, how the new president Biden is going to react. Yesterday, he put out his 100-day plan on dealing with the pandemic. And we now know that we have a vaccine on the horizon, and what benefit and how that's going to impact how quickly the country comes back and the world comes back. That remains to be seen. Some people have it that by uh, the mid-spring we should be in a really relief pattern, and others say it's going to take all the way to the summer, where there's enough people who are inoculated that there will be a favorable impact. So the connectivity that takes place that we need to be sensitive to is uh, businesses in themselves and how they're impacted. And we all know that there are some businesses that the business is booming. You take anybody involved in shipping, logistics, e-commerce, companies like Amazon, Wayfair, Alibaba, and so forth, their business is going up by 2, 3, 400%. We know that there are other businesses that are failing terribly because they've lost their market share or they've lost their whole opportunity to provide their business model into the community. Business response, how the businesses have responded to this has varied dramatically and has left an impact. Government, federal, state, and local issues, how employees have responded to this circumstance, and the whole concept of working from home and how that's differentiated this entire circumstance and the business models that we've all been normal and involved with for many years. So working from home, I mean, the issue is how do we feel about it? And it's a mixed bag when we think about that. Is it temporary, and for how long will it go? I could remember back in April and May when I was involved in a lot of presentations talking about dealing with the impact of COVID, that most people, and including myself, felt as though by the time we got into October, November, and December in the last quarter, that we thought this thing would be moved along pretty quickly. The diminishing impact of COVID through the summer kind of made me feel more comfortable about that. But as we all know now, in the last 2 months, there's been a significant surge. So this working from home issue is probably going to be with us probably through all the way to the end of the first quarter. I'm aware of literally hundreds of companies that have already made decisions to make it permanent. A lot of companies are leasing their office space. They're getting rid of their office space and telling people that you're going to be permanently working from home. And then there are all types of hybrid models out there where some companies have people working home 2 days a week and coming into the office 3, or vice versa, that we all need to be conscious of. There are challenges that we all face personally, and to each person, it has a different degree of impact. For those of us working from home, what size home do we live in? What size apartment do we live in? What size condominium do we live in? And do we have enough space to create an independent office area so that we can have privacy when we're on a phone call or a Zoom meeting like this? Do we have children that now may be restricted from going to school that we also have to take care of from a child care perspective? Pets come in the way. I used to have this problem earlier in the year is because I have 3 dogs and we'd hear them barking in the background, but I've now found a safe haven area for them. So sometimes you might hear a faint sound in the background. Spouses, for those of us that have roommates or a live-in spouse or a significant other, how they have to deal with the pandemic themselves and the fact that they may need space in the household too if they're working. And the big question about effectiveness, okay, is it really effective for the people working from home? And I'll share some points about that as we get into the slides here. And the big question about how long this will be. We're telling companies now who are looking for our advice and counsel that it's going to last easily to the end of the first quarter and possibly through the second quarter as well. Some companies, in trying to be more effective planners, are just drawing out that they're looking at this all the way till the summer of 2021, that their personnel should plan to be working home in that time frame. About 2.5 months ago, a couple of my administrative staff reached out and we surveyed 4 questions to about 250 to 300 employees and managers. And the questions that we asked: are you effective working from home as compared to working from the office? The greatest challenge is working from home. Going forward, would you prefer to work from home? And specifically to management, we asked how they felt the effectiveness of personnel working from home. And while I could spend 60 minutes just on the answers to these questions, I'll just give you a quick summary of the response that we got and what was the consensus. From the first question, are you effective working from home as compared to from the office? There was a split down the middle by employees about that question of whether they worked effectively or not. And it was very clearly split because we gave them a range that they could say, like very or just not a lot, and so forth. And we asked that same question from the management perspective, and we got very different answers. So it was about 50% felt that they were effective employees working from home and 50% did not think they were. But on the management side, it was 75-25. 75% felt it was not effective for their people to work from home, and only 25% felt that there was no difference at all. The greatest challenge working from home for the employees was the issue of time management. Everybody felt that they were either not putting enough hours in or didn't know how to organize their time with the personal responsibilities at their house. And another whole large segment felt as though they were working at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night because it was easy to do that with an office attached to their living room. The boss's greatest challenge is working from home became the issue is what are the people actually and really doing to work for our company. Going forward, we prefer to work from home was split down the middle 50-50 relative to employees. And employees, 50% said that they would love to continue to work from home. The other 50%, they said they can't wait to get back to the office. On the management side, about 90% of the management that we spoke to said that they can't wait to the office to reopen and everybody come back to the space. And then a small percentage, around 10 to 15, felt as though working from home was working for them and that they were looking forward to expanding on that and making a more permanent solution for their company. So I always make this point relative to the guidance that we give companies is to keep in mind the difference in reacting to and handling the pandemic, that there's a lot of differences regionally by state and local in the world. We were considered an essential service through the pandemic because we were a resolution to a lot of companies in dealing with the pandemic. So a lot of myself and a lot of my staff, we traveled and continued to travel from April all the way to this date and time. And we felt that, when you got to the West Coast and the East Coast, you had a significant amount of controls in place. As you got more to the center of the country, those controls were less and less. Other than a few cities, if you take Chicago as an example, and Dallas, where they had certain degree of problems, where there were a lot of controls in place. In most places, people were much more, and businesses were much more relaxed about the problem than they are on the East and the West Coast. Keep in mind the old adage that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to what happens to us. Okay. And I say maybe because, things are changing daily. So we have to be pretty nimble to deal with a lot of the things that are going on. And the big question is, about this working from home is a choice, and whether it's a choice or it's something that's mandated, how can we make it successful? And that's really a lot of what I really want to talk about in this conversation. Risk and cost is impacted in all companies down the line. There are significantly exposed vulnerabilities. And an example of the vulnerability is that we had a company that was based down in Baltimore, and they had a warehouse that they did e-commerce distribution from. And early on, back in late February and early March, they were considered an essential service, and they had 24 workers in that warehouse. And they mandated to those workers that if you want to keep your job, you're going to have to come in. They did a minimal amount of effort at trying to provide COVID protections. And the big thing was people needed to wear masks and socially distance. As compared to other companies that took people's temperature as they came in, asked them about if they have anybody in their family or did they make contact with somebody who did have COVID, where they had the office space or the locations where people work sanitized on a daily basis, a lot of those different things. Well, in this particular case, almost every worker came down with COVID, some seriously. One is still dealing with the problem all the way going back to March, okay, and will probably have a permanent disability as a result of the issue. And there's now a class action suit against the company for not providing enough protection, but mandating that the people actually work there. Another vulnerability is that with so many people working from home, is how does the workers' comp issue work? If a person falls in their own home, going from their office to the bathroom, is that a workers' comp claim, right? So these things have not been tested yet. The insurance companies are not really sure how to respond. Management doesn't know how to respond. So those vulnerabilities increases the liabilities. We know a lot of companies have a loss of revenue margin, and their opportunity for growth has been diminished because of this, because they had people who were selling, who were traveling to see companies, and those that actually stopped. It amplifies the responsibilities, particularly of the management team and the operations personnel. It adds additional costs. Think about the number of computers that had to go out, not only to businesses, but think about all the students that now had to have computers as part of their responsibility. And the big question that I kind of deferred to before, which is, are we really truly performing our best, particularly when we're working from home? So looking at some of the pros and cons relative to working from home is that we have more time to work because we don't have a commute. And we all know that particularly in some of the more urban areas around the country, people could have 90-minute and 120-minute commutes in both directions, which means they could get back 2 or 3 hours of work time. So they have more time to do things. And because your office is right there in the house, it's very easy again at 7 o'clock tonight at night after dinner to go back in and do some things for an hour or so. Pro gives you more freedom. You don't have somebody specifically looking over your shoulder or colleagues all around you and so forth. So you are more free and more independent. And being that you're working from home, in our survey, we got a lot of responses as to why do you think it's good to work from home? A lot of people put in there better interface with personal responsibilities, meaning that they're at their house and they feel more comfortable because they can take care of their personal things in between taking care of their job responsibilities. So if you look over here on the other side, what are the cons? They're exactly the same thing as they are the pro. It just depends on your perspective. You have more time. You also have more time not to work, okay, that you have because you don't have the same kind of oversight. You have more freedom because you don't have that oversight. And are you really performing to the top level or to the best that you can? And yes, you get better interface with your personal responsibilities, but are you allowing that to dominate your time rather than your business responsibilities? And from a management perspective, that's a serious issue that came out of our survey. And also in our own operation, we see that as well. But we're going to talk about ways to help manage that. Other pros and cons for a company looking at this issue. It's reduced overhead costs for the company. When my company went totally working from home and working remotely in 2013, that was a big issue for us, was to be able to do away with brick and mortar and the expense attached to that brick and mortar. And in fact, it really did enable us to reduce our costs, which allowed us to be more competitive in the marketplace. More daily time committed to working than traveling, big pro, came out in our survey. That was a big favorable thing, particularly for commuters. And also allows for better family time. A lot of people thinks that one of the blessings that's come out of this pandemic is the fact that a number of us have gotten much more time involved with our spouses, our family, our children, and so forth. On the con side are all those increased exposures that I just mentioned. Really, how effective is employee in managing those employees? Team camaraderie, which is a big important, it's a successful growth and expansion of companies and raising to best practice level and raising to the highest levels of performance, that's been diminished dramatically. And external interfaces diminishing, meaning that here are some of us, particularly from ISM, we're in a purchasing or a sourcing or a supply chain responsibility. Normally, we're seeing 2, 3, 4, 5 vendors a week, okay, in our offices talking to us face to face through a problem or trying to sell us something. That has ended, okay, and there's an impact to that ending because we don't get that eyeball to eyeball effectiveness in terms of evaluating who we're doing business with. East Coast-based pet food company, that was the company up in Baltimore that I mentioned. The company is still operating, but we got pulled in after that event occurred. We had to rechange their entire whole process, and they ended up spending close to $200,000 additional after the event, where if they had spent the money up front, it probably would have cost about $25,000. A West-based clothing company has everybody operating remotely now. Their office, other than their back warehouse where they're doing distribution from, their entire office staff has now working remotely. But they've been very successful because one of the things I'm going to make a suggestion is you got to have daily meetings with your people who work with you and for you. And they have a daily 9 a.m. Zoom meeting for 30 minutes. The entire organization is on there. Their CEO and president and CFO make regular visits to that meeting, sharing with them how the company's doing, how they're handling things, the impact from a senior management perspective. And then the various managers each of the days take about a 15-minute time frame to talk specifically about their silo in that company. So they're creating a very tight communication chain, and it's making the company work more successfully, and it is creating a degree of camaraderie that's lost because the people are not working physically together. Furloughs, right? There are forced furloughs where people are told you're going to be taking so much time off, and then there are choice furloughs and so forth. Appreciate that most employment issues are controlled at the state and local level, not federally. So each state handles these things pretty dramatically. We were just involved with a company up in Seattle that forced a furlough. And in the state of Washington, the furloughs, when it's over a certain amount of people, has to be actually declared to the state government before it happens. So they may want to intervene. So the company is now in trouble because they forced a furlough without putting the state on notice first and getting their agreement to that actually occurrence happening. So the expectations and the balance of 2020 fall into the first quarter of 2021. We don't think too much is going to change. From the pandemic standpoint, most of the scientists are saying that it's going to take probably the first 2 weeks of January, where the pandemic will not have peaked until that point in time, and that we should start to see a more favorable impact on the second half of January. But we believe that all the controls that are in current now and the people who are working from home are going to continue in the same mode all the way through to the end of March and early April. So people will continue to remotely work from their homes. Difficulty in planning, okay? because of this uncertainty, how do you plan for the future? Your communications with your customers, your communication with your vendors has been diminished. And how do you really correctly plan for the future, particularly if you are selling things to support consumer product sales? And there's a tentativeness in decision making and uncertainty. And we tend, if we don't plan out properly, we tend to make worse decisions. So we recommend that you actually take steps to try and to lessen the impact of the uncertainty in your own organization. And there are four things that we specifically say is first, take a conservative approach to risk. Where some companies, when things are going very well, might have a more liberal approach to how they approach risk. At this point in time, because the consequences could be so great, we suggest taking a more conservative risk. Communication in all directions robustly is a very critical issue. We say robustly in a company, meaning communicating up, down, in, and out. So up to management, to colleagues, to vendors, to suppliers, and to customers. We need to anticipate better. If we anticipate better, we're going to take steps of taking time to evaluate properly. We're going to take the time to get information from several sources and to do full-blown SWOT analysis. If you've not heard that term, it's a form of analysis. You can Google it. It's where you look at the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats of any planned action that you're looking to take. And it helps you think through that action to possibly modify it, tweak it, suspend it, delay it, or make it happen even sooner. And we also recommend the concept of collaboration over independent decision making. And we suggest that because the consequences of the wrong decision are so much greater when you're in this type of trade disruption, this pandemic, that you're better off collaborating and sharing with others before you make a consequential decision. There are a number of other things that I have on this slide here, and you need to manage your time effectively. If you were putting in a 6-hour work day before, then you should be putting in a 6-hour day now. Just because you're home doesn't mean you should be putting in 8 hours or 10 hours. And you should clearly discern when you're in your house how much time you're spending on your job and how much time you're going to spend on personal activities. You need to budget your time effectively and balance it. You need to treat yourself like you're going into the office each day. This concept of rolling out of bed in your pajamas and rolling over to your desk and then turning your computer on and start working, that's bad. But we found out going back all the way to the mid 90s, and then when I did this independently in 2013, is we really have our personnel in the HR files sign a document that if they're working from home, they're going to treat themselves like they're working in the office. So they have to take a shower, brush their teeth, comb their hair. They have to get dressed. They don't have to dress in business casual. They can dress in home clothing, but they've got to get themselves ready and emotionally in mind as if they're walking into the office when they walk into their office. We suggest you outreach to your colleagues periodically. You move the water cooler to a Zoom basis or a web or a Microsoft Teams, or just picking up the phone and having these conversations like you would if you were around the water cooler in your organization. Particularly speaking to the millennials of the world, pick up the phone, okay? Stop the texting, stop the emails, and pick the phone up and have a conversation. Get involved. If you see something going wrong based upon emails or exchanges of different data, speak up, get involved. Create an office and a distinct space in your organization, or your home, or the space that you live in. Even if you don't have a private space, then create an area where maybe you put some plants or some tables around it, so that when you enter that space, you know now you're in your office. And when you're in your office, you have a different acumen, you have a different mindset of how you approach your conversations and your behavior. For those of you that report into somebody, talk to your boss often and constantly be asking questions about how the company is doing, what's changing, what's going on, so that you could be, at least to the greatest extent possible, in the know, which will allow you to plan better as well. You need to socialize responsibly, and I know everybody has their own sensibility to this, so you have to define what that means to you. But there are guidelines that the CDC puts out about wearing the masks and keeping the 6 foot different distances, and various states has numbers of people that you should be able to have in the same room. Working from home, you need to minimize your distractions as best that you can. If you have children, you may need to have a sitter come in even when you're working to keep particularly if they're younger children, distracted and away from you. You need to learn to exercise patience, but be persistent on areas of concern. These are all things that we talk about in our company as a group every time we meet, because of the importance of all these things and practicing them in our profile. We need to be communicating successfully. You need to have systems in place to make sure people are performing. One of the things that we have in our company is we have everybody charting their daily activities. And this goes back to 2013. And their daily activities is posted on a common Microsoft platform, so that anybody in management can see what their activity was for the day. And we have them put in there some of their personal things as well, so we could clearly see what they're doing. And we have no problem if, in fact, they have to go to a meeting somewhere, or they have to take time to homeschool their child. That's perfectly okay. But we just need to make sure that they're budgeting their time correctly. So we have them create these daily reports of their activity. Stay away from potential distractions, disruptions in personal activity. Through this whole pandemic, a lot of people had construction done on their homes. And how are you supposed to be working from your office upstairs when downstairs you have drills and saws and hammers going on? It's almost impossible. And the sensibilities of what are you and management really doing? You have to close the gap. And the gap has to be closed because you have to develop systems to make sure you're aware of what everybody is doing in all 4 directions: up, down, in, and out. So there are so many issues in managing people remotely. And one of them has to do with the technology, because that's the foundation of our ability to work remotely, is the ability and successfully being able to plug in our computer and our phone and other equipment, being able to communicate to the world. Appreciate the fact that we have a series of concerns with people working from home that we need to work on. The liabilities that I mentioned before, recognizing that it's unfertile ground, so we're all creating a new concept as we move forward with this. Nimbleness, creativity, resilience is serious issues that need to be worked on. Understand that in a lot of what's happening, there is no prior legal precedence. The rules of engagement have to be developed company by company, manager to their staff. Time management, as mentioned before, again, becomes an issue. And always remembering that we're trying to set a circumstances in people working from home where their performance is, their value is being achieved for that company's spend. Keeping personnel engaged. Team assignments. Just because everybody's not in the conference room doesn't mean you can't create a team of people working on a particular problem or coming up with a particular solution. And having daily, weekly, and monthly meetings. I mentioned that company previously out in California. They have a daily meeting from 9 to 9:30 every day. their entire organization steps away from what they're doing and attends that meeting. And it creates a camaraderie, it creates a significant information flow, and it shows the interest of management to the personnel and the personnel to management. Okay. Some companies can't do it on a daily basis, then minimally weekly, and certainly even on a monthly basis. Office decorum, office setup. You need to make sure that you have everything that you need and that it's a separate independent space when you can. You need to make sure that you have the right attire and that you've created a business acumen in that space. If you kept a clean desk in your office because either you chose to or you're required to, then you need to do that in your home. And you need to make sure that you and or your staff have all the necessary equipment, the internet connections, and the access to the resources that they need in order to get their job done. The concept of responsibility and accountability, weekly and summary reports of activity, review the deliverables, and as outlined in updating the job description. And a lot of companies that have had problems related to the people working remotely, we're having them change the job descriptions to putting in the things that people need to do and expectations when they're working remotely. This is a critical best practice in HR management. Making sure what you're aware of at their office at home, the work atmosphere that you're in, and anticipate disruptive events. If you know you're expecting a refrigerator to be delivered to your house and you've got to help the people bring it into your kitchen, then plan for that in a specific time frame. A more robust consciousness of personal circumstances. The rules about personal versus business have changed. This is very unfertile, untested ground, and discretion must be seriously thought out. Managers have to be much more sensitive to the fact that that line between personal and business has delineated and is not as black and white as it once was. The reality is that the office and the home have now merged. Subject of responsibility and accountability, team and individual-based guidelines. And most must both be tightly controlled with various degrees of tolerance and patience because of the COVID issue. Leadership becomes important, particularly from the management perspective and also on individuals working from home. The company still needs to instill and inspire and vision, making sure that the important things are getting done, and still instill good operational processes, even though they may be occurring in someone's home or in a remote location. So when asking management what problems they have in that survey and from our own experiences, management is really concerned about the effectiveness, and that's really getting the value for their spend for that employee. They're concerned about the fact that it's much more difficult to arrange a team event or a team participation when people are working remotely. And I say that it's more difficult, but it's not impossible. We have to be sensitive to timely communications. You don't want people who don't have the water cooler, don't have a colleague nearby them to talk to. We need to make sure they're constantly being put aware of what's going on. And that's one of the reasons why I like the daily meeting. And managing has changed. The skill sets to manage people on site are not the same skill sets to manage people that are working remotely and from home. Communication strategies have also changed. Voice and visual become much more critical that we work with. The writing of emails and texting becomes more critical because we're more dependent upon them. And our presentation skills for everybody now, even those who just normally don't use presentations, have to participate in Zoom, WebEx, and Microsoft Teams meeting where you're putting up Word documents or PowerPoints or Excel documents. You need to work these. Your effectiveness in your job is also determined by your effectiveness of how you communicate. The increased exposures, personnel online from home, the bad guys taking advantage with all the chaos. In the study that we did, we asked the question about what kind of problems have they had, and we were very alarmed to hear about the number of cybersecurity issues that have impacted both people and companies that are working from home, because the same firewall protections that exist in a corporate structure may not work as well in a remote environment. So we need to be sensitive to that, because um, um, there's been over 1,000% growth in 2020 in cyber crimes impacting people working from home. The concept of phishing, going into emails to try to get information that can be used against that person or their computer or that company. The remote theft of data and intellectual property rights, the ransomware, the disruptionware, cyber theft, firewall protections not being as robust externally as they are internally, and appreciate that the cyber criminals, which typically had a larger focus or more robust focus on bigger companies, now have learned that they could target smaller companies and individuals. They get smaller returns, but it's low hanging fruit for them to go after. Both as managers and as employees, you need to make sure that your company is providing a high level of cybersecurity protection for you at home. So other things to think about in managing people remotely: weekly and monthly reviews, constantly being positive, realistic, and upbeat. Listen, this is a tough time. COVID fatigue is setting in. We're not happy about what's going on for the most part, but certainly in management and as an employee, we need to be looking at the positive of this event, of which there actually are a lot of positives that have actually come out of this. And hopefully when we come out stronger and we look back, we'll see them more clearly. I believe that it's even more important time to be more open, more honest, more transparent, and forthright in how we interface in our responsibilities, how we communicate things, and how we deal with our colleagues. And appreciate the fact that in better leadership, visual contact, the use of the Zoom, the use of the WebEx, the use of the Microsoft Teams, and forcing people to have eye contact in the meetings is critical, and certainly done when appropriate. One of the things working from home, particularly related to technology, is you need to make sure that you have proper connectivity. It's not going to work if you don't have a system, particularly if you're using Bluetooth or you're using, anything that's working, device to device where it's not connected is critical. You need to understand you've got three primary products: Zoom, WebEx, and Microsoft Teams. You need to be able to navigate in all those, because you could be talking to a vendor, a supplier, or a customer, and they may be using a particular one. But I always say learn to master one as your preferred, so you know how to navigate all the buttons and bells and whistles in that program. You need to learn to talk, and hopefully I accomplished that for you today, as if people are in front of you. I kind of create a visualization in my head in the webinars that I'm doing and the conversations that I have a group of people in front of me. I actually talked about this back in August to a trade association group, and the vice president of the group told me about a month later, called me up and said to me, he goes, in my office now, when I do the webinar, I actually have like 4 dummies sitting in chairs in front of me. He goes, and it's made me feel like I actually do have people in front of me. Now that's a little extreme and actually kind of funny, but it works for him. So, if that works for him and he's able to be more relaxed like that, then so be it. So we all could find things to make things a little bit more easier for us. So appreciate that sales has changed in all kinds of companies, because that face-to-face isn't occurring, as well as customer service. So we have this reduced or no in-person meetings. A lot of companies now have very stringent policies that if it's not essential, they're not allowing visitors into their organizations. The business models are changing for procurement for that same reason. And value add becomes more important. Responsiveness, price, and deliverables all become critical issues. Some recommendations, okay? You have to learn to be flexible. You have to learn to be creative, and a willingness to explore new options. You have to focus on differentiation in a much greater way. You have to do a significant amount more of mining um, on competition, contemporary offerings, and new client needs, creating opportunities and new modes of contact, communication, and business development. Adding value. COVID Relief Assistance, a 3D printing company. 3D printing company, which is selling their products to both businesses and also to businesses that have a lot of their engineers and technicians working remotely. They offered, as part of the sale of their product, the ability to visit the engineer or technician in their home in a safe manner, okay, to show them how to use the equipment, even install the equipment in some cases, and work through any of the problems. So they move their customer service ability, this 3D company, to be able to work with the company and their clients at their homes. Payment terms become critical because a lot of companies have a fair amount of cash, okay? We have a tire manufacturer that is sitting in a very good position right now. They have a significant amount of cash on hand. We did our RFP recently for them for a particular product that they needed. It was about a $2 million spend. And once we were done negotiating, we went back to the vendor and said, if we paid you within 3 days of the invoice, what kind of discount would you give us? And we got a 4.5% discount for paying in 3 days. The money is not even making that kind of percentage in the bank. So we're way ahead of the game by paying that bill off more quickly. Providing home technical assistance. We have a hardware reseller as a client, and they have evening classes now for all the companies that are buying their equipment in how to use that equipment. There's no cost to these events. They run at 30-minute spots so that people aren't distracted for long periods of time. And they're running them at several different time slots during the evening. And they're finding that this is a significant value add to their commercial sales and personal sales. In procurement, we make recommendations that we need to understand the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is accidental, it's involuntary, it's effortless. Listening is focused, voluntary, intentional. We need to identify what the needs and necessary deliverables are now. We need to explore, question, and survey. We need to become a better inquirer and listener. And we need to create specific strategy and tactics for sourcing, purchasing, and vendor management, what I believe are the 3 principal responsibilities of people involved in procurement management. And understand the difference between vision, the higher thought process, the strategy, which is really identifying where we want to go, and tactics, which are the actual steps and actions that we need to take that makes the strategy occur that achieves the vision we're looking for. Strategic planning and recommendations. Understand that we have to be able to mine successfully. We should use a team-based approach, constantly work that SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Really understand what our operational needs and our ability to execute. And appreciate that these plans always need to be tweaked and they're always attached to some form of training. And the concept of vision is we need to be able to exercise vision and empathy for everybody's circumstances. We need to understand that leading is really influencing. We need to be inspirational. We need to create a sensibility about ourselves that has a high degree of integrity. We have to set up systems to demonstrate responsibility and accountability. And we have to learn to be more persuasive from a substance perspective. Working remotely and purchasing and supply chain, relationship is still critical. It's just not going to be in person. Attend virtual industry trade association meetings. Me and my staff have been to about 15 of them since March, where most trade shows and trade events have been disbanded, but a lot have still had them virtually, and we have found tremendous value, and they seem to be getting them much more successful as time has moved on, as they're going through their own learning curves, how to run these events virtually more successfully. When you can meet and greet, go off site, meet somebody at a Starbucks somewhere. Utilize those web-based visual platforms. Raise the level of due diligence. What value can they add relative to the pandemic and the recovery? Put your problems and issues that your company is having relative to the pandemic and the recovery process, and have them help you resolve those problems. And yourself run vendor fairs. Vendor fairs can be accomplished virtually. You can run 1 or 2 day events. You identify your list of current and potential vendors in a particular vertical. You allow time for questions and dialogue. You show a level of appreciation to your vendors and your suppliers. And from those meetings, you can schedule next steps that's out there. To those vendor fairs, internally, you can invite the stakeholders that have or impacted by that decision for the purchase of that service or product. You can schedule it by product or service line. You can identify specific control of format and timeline. You can determine who all the invitees are. You can make contact, email, dialogue, email again. And you can structure the format and the scheduling of the event. It doesn't have to be 3 days back to back. It could be 2 hours for 1 day a week over a 3-week period. These virtual trade fairs can be done, okay, vendor fairs can be done however you want to structure. At the end of the day, the virtual fair, vendor fair, keeps vendors interested in talking to you, creates a focused event with tremendous information and vetting, assists you in time management because you're controlling what time of day and what days, what weeks, and what months you're going to do it. And your running these events demonstrates your leadership internally to the stakeholders you report to or work with. Last thought on this subject, because these things we're having a lot of success with, is you need to line up all your tier 1 vendors for a 90-minute conference call. Let them know how the company is doing through the pandemic and announce any future business plans for 2021. The more your vendors know about what you're doing, the more and better they can service you. Discuss the impacts to procurement, identifying what your problems are, because they might be able to potentially resolve them, and will be favorably received as a proactive leadership event by you and your company, by your vendors, your suppliers, as well as your customers on the other side of that equation. Responsibility to our business as respects to health and security, concerns around the pandemic, the basics that we have: social distancing, masks, working in smaller groups, and the need for continued testing. I have a lot of clients now that are bringing in a rapid test mobile truck to their facility and having all their employees tested, and they're getting the results back in 15 minutes. Okay, what better way to show your concern and also to put a control for safety in your own organization? Having controls over visitor management, meeting participation, particularly outside of the organization, and making sure that you're also in your program is looking for symptom management, meaning that those that might have symptoms, how you're handling that individual. In summary, working from home is clearly a challenge. We're all facing it. There isn't a person on the planet who isn't facing this issue. But the challenge can be managed successfully through the disciplines that I've talked about in this presentation, setting up accountability and responsibility, and exercising a degree of leadership. So I appreciate very much your kind attention and being part of this discussion. And I hope that you're all well, healthy, and safe. And I'll open it up for any questions that any person might have.
Well, thank you, Tom. That was a very informative presentation. And I just want to let everybody know, Tom already shared the slides with me. So tomorrow when I send out information in continuing education credit, I will be sending a copy of his presentation as well for those people that would like it.
So Kathy, let me just mention to
Sure.
anybody is always welcome. You have my email address and my phone number. You're always welcome to also call to make a comment or ask a question. There's never any costs or obligations. As a extension to Kathy and all the members, I'd be more than happy to receive any calls or emails and try to respond to them the best that I can.
Thank you. Tom, we did get a comment. Said, thank you, Tom. Well done. Thank you so much. Maria, Tom, and all, thank you for so much insightful. Let me get that up again. Thank you all for such an insightful presentation. Many good best practices checked and many new noted. Thank you very much. So Tom, it looks like the presentation was a success, and
Right.
I want to thank you again for being our presenter. I'm going to turn it over to Anu. Anu, did you want to come up back on and talk about our next portion of the program? I do have the networking link. It's in the chat bar, and all you have to do is click on that. But you give us just copy it right now, and then click on it in about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Kathy. You already did all that was needed. I really enjoyed the presentation. I'm so looking forward to talking to some of them after whoever decides to stay back. I'm looking forward to talking more about it. Thank you so much, Tom. Hopefully you can stay back too after, and we'll meet in 5 minutes. You can click on the link that Kathy has provided in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. And we just gonna, we're just telling